So the first job in this next video section is to complete the electric blue stripe of feathers that runs down the back of the Kingfisher. And the initial base layer that I'm putting in is using the Aquamarine pencil. It's a very bright, almost turquoise pencil, which hopefully will create a nice base to build this striking colour upon. So as before, we're looking for a nice, fairly even coverage of colour, making sure the pencil strokes go in the direction of the feathers again. And if there are areas where they're still evident as we move on to applying more colour, then at least they will help to enhance the feeling of detail that we're looking for. Gradually working back and forth across it, evening out the colour. Use my large wash brush just to gently remove any little bits of debris that accumulate on the surface. Very useful piece of equipment to have. It's much more successful than taking the risk of trying to brush it off with your hand. Your fingers, as they move across the surface, will create some friction and potentially might smudge some of the detail that you've already added. But the wash brush can be just gently dusted across the surface, moves any little bits and pieces out of the way, keeps your working surface nice and clean. So now I'm moving down that section again. This time I've reverted to the light phthalo blue, so we're trying to keep some consistency within the colours. Do you remember this is the base colour for all the darker sections of the blue or greeny blue plumage. So using it again just helps to unify the composition, but it's not so dark a colour that it's obliterating the vibrancy of the aquamarine. I'm using the phthalo blue on these sections of the secondary feathers just to darken them up a little bit. I left them pale because they're on the highlighted side of the wing, but they were starting to get lost in amongst the bright blue on the back. So I just added a little more colour to them to darken them up a touch. And now I'm doing the reverse on the back section now. I'm using a Prismacolor white pencil. And the reason I'm using this is because it's a wax-based pencil which is much softer in texture. And it allows me just to make that blue back section a little bit paler. Softer pencils will work better over areas where you've already added some colour. Now with that pale layer applied, I'm coming back in again with the Aquamarine. So we're starting to get some texture down that section of the bird's body, some variation within these fine feathers. Slowly but surely we're getting the striking colour that we're looking for. And of course that folded wing lying over those pale back feathers is going to cast a bit of a shadow. So I'm using the Payne's grey now just to put in a darker area just to indicate where the wing's casting a shadow. And using my bright blender then just to again soften and slightly lighten that area. And working that blender over the back feathers as well helps to make that colour a little punchier, a little stronger. Now when we're talking about feather colour, everybody knows the vibrant colours, blues and oranges of the Kingfisher. And you could look at this picture as it stands at the moment and perhaps be left with the feeling that the darker feathers here aren't really as blue as a Kingfisher's would be. And the important thing to appreciate is that the colour of any bird is going to be dictated by what's around it, its surroundings, how much light is falling on it, whether it's sitting in shadow. And when you change those ambient conditions, the colour will change with it. So one bird in various situations can exhibit a whole variety of different colours dependent upon the light and the situation. So you can't say that a Kingfisher is one particular blue regardless of where you see it. And what that gives you then is a little bit of scope for variation in the colours that you use. So having reached the base of the bird's back and arrived at the feathers on the tail, they will be the same colour as the feathers on the wing and the darker blue feathers on the head. So it's phthalo blue followed by peacock blue again, building that tone. But as I did with the primary feathers, I've delineated the tail feathers by leaving gaps in between them. It just helps the process of establishing each of them in turn, getting the shapes right. looking at that area of the bird's back and realising I came down too far, went up too far with the feathers of the tail. So I lifted out a little bit using the mounting putty and then reinstated some of the back feathers with the Aquamarine pencil. So once again, this ability to make adjustments when you need it is really useful. None of us necessarily make the right decision with every pencil stroke. And as we review what we've done so far, it's often a case that we feel that certain areas may need changing a little bit. And the mounting putty, blue tack as it's known to those of us in the UK, is a wonderful tool to have. I'll often, if I'm using it a lot, sit with it in my left hand. I'm primarily right-handed, so I'll sit with it in my left hand. It keeps it nice and warm, and the warmer it is, the more of an adhesive quality it develops. And that means that in areas where you do need to remove a bit of colour, then you can squeeze it down to a shape that works depending upon how large an area you're going to need to remove. Touch it gently against that colour surface and lift it away. Now, we don't use them in the way you would normally a standard plastic rubber. There's no scrubbing it backwards and forwards across the surface of the paper. It's about touch and lift. Change it, reinstate your shape, touch and lift away again, and you can do that as many times as you need to. You won't be leaving any sticky residue on the surface, so you can carry on drawing. But it does give you the capacity to make those all-important changes. With those colours applied, another quick stroke with the bright blender just to soften the dark lines and unify that a bit more. And I've chosen a deep red pencil just to indicate the one small section of the bird's left foot that you can see. The foot would actually be a brighter red than this, but of course it's sitting in shadow, so the darker colour has much more successfully created the result that we want. A few more fine adjustments made to the tail. Put the phthalo blue in again. You can see I've been along the edge of the bottom edge of those feathers from the back, just introducing some darker lines into that to show that those feathers do break up a little bit along their edge and show some of the tail colour beneath. Redefining that shadow tight underneath that wing just to draw this video to conclusion. And in the next section we'll move on to depicting the branch on which the bird is perched.